Hi everyone, and welcome to another crime and punishment story. This week I am covering the story of Christopher English, Isabella Robson and the murder of James Lorimer in Newcastle upon Tyne in 1874. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. I know that usually I like to do a little backstory about the people involved in these crimes, but it isn't always possible, as sometimes details just can't be found, and this is one of those cases. But I will include the little amount that I do know, and it is very little. Christopher English was said to be around 24 years old in 1874, so he would have been born in around 1850. At the trial, Christopher was said to be a labourer. Isabella Robson was said to be around 19 years old in 1874, and she would have been born in around 1855. She was described in some articles as an unfortunate, and in others it was suggested that she worked the streets. James Lorimer, the victim, was said to be around 32 years old in 1874, and he would have been born in around 1842. He was married to Mary, and the couple lived in Gateshead. I did not find any details of any children. James worked at Dunn and Company's, a draper's in Market Street in Newcastle. He most likely worked for William Alder Dunn, who had at one time been in partnership with Bainbridge's, but they had had a bit of a fallout and the partnership was dissolved, and Dunn and Company was now situated next door to Bainbridge's on Market Street. It was a very well-known shop at the time and had a higher class of customer than many other shops, which no doubt gave James Lorimer a slightly better standard of living, and he was described as being a very respectable man. But it would seem that even respectable men can be led astray. On the night of April the 10th, 1874, James Lorimer had left his place of work after having been paid his week's wages, and was heading to his home in Gateshead that he shared with his wife. However, he never made it. Instead, on his walk home, he came into contact with a young lady by the name of Isabella Robson, and the two decided to head to the Greyhound Inn at the Side in Newcastle. There are no reports given during the inquest or the trial of the conversation between the two that led James to change his mind about going home. The two did not stop in the public house for very long, and for some reason, just before leaving, James attempted to give the landlady, a Mrs. Allen, the money he had in his pocket for safekeeping. He tried to do this twice, and both times Mrs. Allen had declined to take it, telling him that he could take care of his own money. Shortly after this second attempt to give her the money, James left with Isabella. James and Isabella were then seen talking briefly outside the pub, and they then headed off in the direction of Tucker's Entry, which was where Isabella was living at the time. The next time that James was seen was when PC William Brown had gone to the house in Tucker's Entry for an entirely unconnected reason. He had seen both Isabella and James sitting inside together, and he felt that James was a little worse for the drink, but he did not notice anything strange and left after only a few minutes. At around 12:30 that same night, a man by the name of Arthur McGorry, who also lived in Tucker's Entry, heard a noise on the stone stairs outside of his window. He felt it sounded like someone shuffling along the steps, and he then heard a heavy fall. He heard some footsteps on the stairs just after this, then the sound of another fall. At this point he went outside of his door and saw a man walking up the stairs, who on seeing him began to run up the stairs. He shouted after the man, but he did not reply. He then went back inside and got a candle and went back to the stairs, and as he turned and looked down, he saw the body of a man lying with his head facing downwards and his feet facing towards him. He took a closer look and realised the man was bleeding, and he did not seem to be making any effort to get up, so he immediately went to find a policeman. The policeman who he found was P.C. Brown, who was on duty in the side at that time, and he had also been the same policeman who had been to Tucker's Entry earlier that night. He found James Lorimer lying on the stairs. At this point he was still alive, but it was clear that he could not stand up, and P.C. Brown could not move him alone, so he immediately went for another PC, and the two carried James on a stretcher to Manners Police Station, where Dr. Dodds examined him and immediately sent him to the Newcastle Infirmary. P.C. Brown noted that this was the same man that he had seen earlier in the house he had visited at Tucker's Entry. At the infirmary, James was examined by Dr. Rowell. He was almost unconscious and unable to speak to anyone. It was noticed that he did smell of alcohol, but it was impossible to tell how much he had drank due to his being almost unconscious because of the fall. At this point in time, no one actually knew who he was. However, while he was in the infirmary, he was identified and his wife was sent for. It is not explained how they were able to identify him at the infirmary, but on arrival his wife confirmed that he was indeed her husband, James Lorimer, and that he never regained consciousness and died at around 7 p.m. Some reports do suggest it was 6 to 7 a.m, but his wife stated 7 p.m. at the inquest. Inspector Bowmaker then went to the house in Tucker's Entry, where James had been seen earlier by P.C. Brown. Here he found Christopher English, Isabella Robson and Margaret Middleton. All three were taken to the police station. However, only Christopher and Isabella were charged with the murder of James Lorimer, and Margaret was later released without charge. The inquest was held at the Durham Ox Inn in Newcastle. However, it would seem that neither Christopher or Isabella were present, which the coroner, the witnesses and the jury found a little strange. The coroner explained that he had applied to the magistrates for them to be present, but this had been denied, and he did not know why. He stated that a young clerk had recently been appointed, and that he had advised the magistrates not to let them come to the inquest. Mary Lorimer stated that the man at the infirmary had indeed been her husband James. He had died while she had been with him. She explained that he had not worked for Dunn & Company long. He had only started the job on March the 10th. Mrs. Allen stated that a man and a young woman had come into the Greyhound Inn at the side on the night in question. The man had tried to give her his money for safekeeping, but she had refused to take it. She stated that while they were in the pub, two men came in and talked to the young woman, who they seemed to know. She said that both of these men and the woman saw the money that James had offered her to keep for him. She said she did not know any of them, and that she had spoken to James briefly, telling him she did not think he was in good company. She said that to her it was clear that the people he was with were bad company, and that she advised him that he would be safer if he left and went home. She also claimed to have told the young woman that James still had all of his money, and that she, the young woman, had asked how much he had. She had told her that he had around £3. Today that would be around about £400, so it was quite a lot of money. I must add here that I found it strange that Mrs. Allen would advise James to go home, stating that he was in bad company, and then tell one of these people how much money he had in his possession. She went on to say that she saw the couple leave together, and on looking out she saw them heading towards Tucker's Entry. They went towards the railway arch. She said, had the man and woman accused been present at the inquest, she would have been able to identify them, as she had seen them very clearly. Dr. Rowell, surgeon at Newcastle Infirmary, said the post-mortem had revealed that James had a fractured skull in two places. His brain was actually torn at one side, and he felt that these injuries had caused his death. He also stated that on examination all the other organs in his body were healthy with no signs of any disease. He did, however, have other external injuries, including several bruises on his head and on one knee, a black eye, and it appeared that his nose had been bleeding. He felt the injuries had been caused by violence, most likely a fall or falls on the stone steps, and he did not feel that they had been caused by someone striking him. He said it was simply impossible to tell if James had fallen or if he had been pushed, as he believed the injuries would have been the same regardless. It was made clear that there were no lights on the steps, and at the top where James had been there was also a small wooden set of steps, which was right at the very top. It was said to be a dangerous place in the dark, and one of the jury asked, if a man was to fall, would he continue from the top to the bottom without stopping? The reply to this was, it might be possible. P.C. Brown spoke of visiting a house in Tucker's Entry earlier on the night of the crime. He told of seeing Isabella and James, and how James seemed to have had quite a bit to drink. He had no reason to stay at the house, nor did he have any reason to arrest anyone, so he had left them to continue their drinking. The jury were unable to reach a verdict. It seems they felt certain that death had indeed been caused by the fall, but whether James had been pushed or had fallen by accident was unclear to them, leaving what we would call today an open verdict. Despite this, Christopher and Isabella had both been brought before the magistrates at Newcastle Police Court, where they had both been charged with the murder of James Lorimer. It was at the police courts that Margaret Middleton gave evidence that James had indeed been in the house in Tucker's Entry on the night in question. She said this was a home that she shared with Christopher English, and that Isabella had been staying with them for a few days. She said she had returned home with Christopher to find Isabella in the house with James. James was very much the worse for drink, and he had been, in her words, pulling Isabella about, which she did not like, and she asked Christopher to show him out of the house. Margaret said that he had taken him down the flight of wooden stairs, but had not taken him any further. She said he had not been out of the house for more than 2 or 3 minutes, and that he had not left the house again that night, and that Isabella had not left the house at all. Elizabeth Watson stated that she had seen both Margaret and Christopher on Pilgrim Street earlier that night, and they appeared to be following James and Isabella, but she said she could not be sure if they had followed them to Tucker's Entry, but they did seem to be heading in that direction. The magistrates had retired to consider the case, and on returning they stated that they felt there was a case to answer, and that both Christopher and Isabella should be committed for trial on a charge of wilful murder. The defence counsel seemed surprised at this, and actually asked if the magistrates were sure that this was the right course of action, as they felt that this had been a simple accident and there was no case to answer. However, the magistrates assured them they were indeed certain, and that a trial before a jury was required. The trial took place on July the 17th, 1874 in Newcastle. Both Christopher and Isabella pleaded not guilty. Ellen McGorry, wife of Arthur, who lived at Tucker's Entry, stated that she too had heard the sounds on the stairs on the night of the crime. In fact, she said she had heard them before her husband, and it had been she who had sent him outside to look to see what was happening. She herself said she did not go out, and although there was a window facing the stairs, she could not clearly see what had been going on outside of her home, but she believed she had seen what appeared to be a man running up the stairs after she had heard the sound of someone falling. Arthur McGorry stated that his eyesight was quite poor, and he could not confirm that Christopher English was the same man that he had seen running up the stairs on the night he found the body of James Lorimer. Mrs. Allen gave the same evidence as that which she had given at the inquest. P.C. Brown also gave similar evidence, only adding that when he visited the house earlier that evening, only James and Isabella had been present, but that Margaret Middleton had arrived a few minutes after him, and another person, who he did not know, came to the door while he was inside, but did not enter and left almost immediately. Margaret Middleton strangely seemed to have changed her evidence, but I do have to say at this point that she may not have done so. It may just have been a bad reporting from the inquest, which did sometimes happen. But the difference that I noted was that she now said both Christopher and Isabella went outside when James left. She said Isabella had asked Christopher to help James with the wooden stairs, which was the same as she'd said previously, and that he again returned some 2 to 3 minutes later, but that it had been around 10 minutes after this before Isabella had returned. It was stated quite clearly that no money was found on the body of James Lorimer. Money had been found in the possession of Isabella, Christopher and Margaret, but the amount in total did not seem to add up to the amount that James had left when he had left work. However, it was still a considerable sum, and more, it seems, than Isabella, Christopher and Margaret would have been expected to have. The prosecution stated in their opinion James had been robbed without a doubt. His money was gone, and it could not have been lost, as his purse, men carried what was often described as a purse in those days for their money, was still in his possession when he was found, but it had been empty. He also felt that a man could not have fallen down those stairs, that he had to have been thrown or pushed, and that the only people who could have done this were Christopher and Isabella. It was for the jury to decide if this was a clear case of willful murder or manslaughter. The defence stated that all the evidence pointed to the fact that James had been drunk and unsteady on his feet and had simply fallen down the stairs in the dark. As for the sound of 2 falls, it may be that he had tried to get up after the first fall and had fallen again. This was not impossible if a man was dazed from the first fall and much the worse for drink. It was clear that he felt Christopher and Isabella were not guilty. The jury were very quick to reach their decision, taking only around 1 minute to find both Christopher and Isabella guilty of manslaughter. It seems that they did not believe that James had simply fallen. The judge then sentenced both Christopher and Isabella to 10 years in prison. Later records show that Christopher was imprisoned several more times after his release in around 1884, 3 times for brothel keeping and once for robbery with violence, with 1892 being the last known conviction. There are no further records of Isabella being imprisoned after her release in around 1884, but of course she may have married or died, but I found no evidence of these either. To me, this was a very strange case. James was described as a respectable man, but it seems he was very easily persuaded by Isabella to go to the pub with her and then to her home, and he was happy to do this and not return to his wife. His new job and smart clothes may not have actually reflected his true personality. The evidence against both Christopher and Isabella did not seem clear. No one saw them push James down the stairs, and the main witness on the stairs spoke only of seeing a man who he could not identify heading up the stairs after he heard James fall, and he did not mention seeing a woman on the stairs at all. It does seem clear that James was robbed. He had no money on his person when he was found, and it seems that the money was the most likely motive for inviting him back to the house, perhaps in the hope of giving him more drink and then stealing the money that he had while he was unaware of what was happening. But when he left, did he fall or was he pushed? I cannot truly find any evidence that he was pushed. But what do you think? Did he fall simply because it was dark on the stairs and he had been drinking? Did he realise that they had stolen his money and argue with Christopher and fall during a scuffle, or did Christopher simply push him while Isabella watched? Did they deserve to be sent to prison, or were they innocent? Whatever really did happen on the stairs that night, it is still a very sad and tragic story, as Mary Lorimer was left without her husband, and James lost his life because, it seems, he could not resist the lady on the street and the lure of drink. I hope you have enjoyed this story and found it interesting. I do thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again very soon.